Why Media Group? The fastest growing media group in North America.
Hello and welcome to Y Media Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh, and it's always so great to spend this time with you today. We have really big news when it comes to this US-Iran peace deal. It was signed by the president, as well as from the US side, as well as the Iranian side. It's really big news, bringing an end to this more than 3-month war that was taking place since February 28th. And we have the latest development on what is taking place in Canadian news as well as in sports. So let's start with the top news that we've all been looking at and really covering in so much detail during these last 3 months. At the end of the G7, essentially, while President Trump was in France, he signed this historic MOU. First, it was scheduled to be signed on Friday in Geneva, and yet there was some indication that the signing might have taken place on Wednesday. We saw that crawl through Twitter and some state media in Iran and some other sources from Washington, D.C., but we weren't sure because when the president did his G7 announcement press conference yesterday, he said that the deal will be signed soon, maybe tomorrow or the day after, is what the president said. And later this evening, he signed it, and you can. This is historic. At first, we were told that he might send Vice President J.D. Vance to sign it on Friday, but he ended up signing it himself. In France, where you have the French president next to him, there he's showing this MOU that he signed on the 14 points, which we went over yesterday, but we'll go over them today because it's important to know what is in this deal. Essentially, we were also told that the reason it was going to be moved up when we were looking at sources that it might be signed on Wednesday as opposed to Friday was because essentially they wanted to release what's in the deal, not just with speculation, which we looked at through Iranian news media, Mer News, and then CNN published it yesterday. So this is a way now that it's, announced, it's there for public. And the other item is that the president said that he wanted to open up the Strait of Hormuz as soon as possible, not wait till Friday. Essentially, the reason Friday was chosen, according to the president, was because, Iranians had to remove their mines in the Strait of Hormuz and really prepare for opening up this critical waterway. So now the U.S.-Iran peace agreement has been formally signed. And this is very significant because it was signed by US President Donald Trump and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. And this is ending the 3 months conflict that we saw take place. And essentially, what this MOU does is give a 60-day negotiation window, a process towards what would be a final settlement where the bigger items will be agreed upon. But what this means is upon signing this, it is end of what we would see any escalations between Iran and the United States. And including in this MOU also contains Lebanon as one of the key items in the 14 articles. Now, both leaders are presenting the deal as a victory, with the Iranian president calling it a historic document and President Trump arguing that it prevented global economic crisis. As we saw prices of oil go through the roof here in Canada, it went from, prior to the war at $1.30 to almost $1.90 to $2, very close to that mark, and then fluctuating 10 to 15, 20 cents a day at times. In the United States, it actually swung up to a national average of $4.53 a gallon, and in some states like the western states in California, going up to almost above $6 a gallon. So and then we saw the inflation numbers go up, and part of that is because 40% of those inflationary numbers were because of the increased energy prices. So now this agreement is immediate. It impacts include reopening the Strait of Hormuz, lifting the U.S. naval blockade, extending the ceasefire during this period for the 60 days that, that there's going to be just diplomatic negotiations. and beginning the negotiations on the sanctions relief that Iran has been asking for. And the critical parts that the United States have been really pursuing is the nuclear issues. So, this is very significant because there are still some items that remain unresolved, which we're looking to see what it means on the final deal. So now the immediate actions are significant because this means the fighting between the United States and Iran has officially ended. So we're not going to wake up to a surprise headlines in the news that, you know, one of the countries started and then, the escalations and then President Trump's Truth Social posts of what he's going to do to Iran and vice versa. So that is something that we're not supposed to see for 60 days because the fighting is officially ended. Now, the Strait of Hormuz reopens to international shipping. We've heard from news agencies that, ships have been passing through the Strait of Hormuz today without any difficulty and not hearing about any tolls that had to be paid. So, as the president had said that it's going to be toll free, which it was prior to February 28th, before the war started. And this also includes the U.S. being, lifting its naval blockade, which essentially, if you recall, it started after the initial ceasefire that was announced on April 8th, where you had, prior to the first round to sit down for the conversation to end the war, where Vice President J.D. Vance was present at in Islamabad, that's when the U.S. blockade started. Which essentially blocking the Iranian ports so it's not able to ship its oil. So now that's significant because now the US will remove their naval blockade, and so CENTCOM will not be in the area, as we saw, from stalemaents to escalations taking place in the waterway, and all in the name of a ceasefire. And then the 60-day negotiation period begins today. So we are now on, day one of day 60 that we're tracking. And certain sanction waivers are expected to be issued. And another significant thing is that the frozen Iranian assets will gradually be released during this future agreement. And the biggest item, I think, is the most contentious one, which is, raised a lot of eyebrows from all sides, especially in US media, when it comes to neocons who do not believe that the president should have, signed this MOU. But the major one is the framework that includes a proposed $300 billion, which will go towards a reconstruction fund intended to support rebuilding and economic stabilization across Iran in the affected areas of its infrastructure that's been highly damaged. We're getting estimates about trillions of dollars of damage because of this war. Now, what is top of mind is the Strait of Hormuz, right? It carries 20% of global oil and LNG trade, and not to mention fertilizer. So making it very significant when it comes to reopening it as one of the most important economic elements of the agreement, which many countries do welcome, whether it's the European countries or China or South Korea or Japan or India. And as well as, countries in Africa. Markets have responded positively as the fears for prolonged energy shock has eased. We're seeing Brent crude down to low and high 70s in the last few days. So that's significant because the markets do react to the headlines when there is, any sort of escalations that take place regarding the Strait of Hormuz. And we were able to see the markets react within a 5% swing. So now we're seeing the prices come down. And so when the biggest unanswered question that I think the neocons or Americans who really maybe don't agree with this deal is what is going to happen to this nuclear program, because that is one of the most unanswered questions. We had Vice President J.D. Vance do a press conference earlier today answering some of these questions and essentially saying that that's going to be all part of the 60 days of the negotiations that will take place for the final agreement, and also talking about the $300 billion of this reconstruction fund, saying that, it's not going to, enable Iran to pursue its nuclear activities because it needs money and it's got trillions of dollars worth of damage to its infrastructure. So he was, identifying some of those things. And to President Trump's, constant response to what if Iran doesn't, go through the terms and follow through. President Trump at the G7 was saying that they will go back to, in his terms, bombing Iran, essentially escalating the war, is what President Trump's response is. That's saying that, there's this MOU that's signed. Now we're going to negotiate the terms. So now what everyone's looking into is to see what this agreement is going to look like in 60 days. And the questions are around the uranium enrichment limits, the enriched uranium that is still in Iran, inspections and verification mechanisms, long-term monitoring, what sanctions relief Iran receives in exchange specifically, aside from, the sanctions that's going to be removed on Iranian oil, but what other sanctions will be lifted, and what constitutes as non-compliance by the Iranians that would, make this agreement an issue. So now reports indicate that the agreement does not fully address Iran's ballistic missile program, which remains a major concern for Israel and some of the US lawmakers. And the biggest item in this, aside from the $300 billion reconstruction fund, is Lebanon and its regional security. So this agreement contains provisions related to ending hostilities in Lebanon, but Israel has not fully embraced all the aspects of the arrangement. And Iran has said that Lebanon is a key part of this, and that, if it's not followed through, then that would be the United States being in breach on this MOU because it's not able to, put pressure on Israel in terms of its military action in southern Lebanon. So Israeli military operations have still continued in southern Lebanon, even as early as today, despite the signing. And the Iranian president says that the newly signed US-Iran agreement proves Iran did not trade its dignity and independence for any threat or pressure. Both Tehran and Washington seek to sell this deal as a victory to their domestic audiences. We have pictures of the Iranian president with the signed MOU, so you'll be able to see that as well. And the president of Pakistan in terms of signing it as a moderator, a mediator during this entire time. So this agreement by the Iranians has been, presented as what it would be. There you go. There you have the picture from the Iranian president saying that, this is a victory and that Iran, in his terms, did not trade its dignity and independence for any threat or pressure, signifying that during the 3 months that this conflict has been going on for, that Iran did not cave in. It appears, his statement would be aimed at what would be Iran's political establishment, because we did see protests take place for Iranians who are against this deal, while other Iranians welcomed it. So there is a split, just like there is in the United States, for many that welcome this and want to put it behind them and move on and have affordability when it comes to their gas prices, their groceries, and just to have affordability in their energy costs, bring down inflation. But yeah, so you have the Iranian president's statement potentially also targeting his message to the Revolutionary Guard and the domestic critics who fear that Iran would be forced into major concessions. So now his message is that Iran negotiated from a position of strength rather than surrender. But that's to be seen in terms of what's going to come out of this final agreement. That is going to be the critical part, and what parts of the 14 points will be actually in the final agreement. Just because there's an MOU, it doesn't mean that all items of the MOU is going to be in this final agreement that's going to be binding by the United Nations. Well, you have Trump's message, on the other hand, saying that, he did this really to, end what would be a global inflationary times and an affordability crisis that has affected, many, many countries because of the Strait of Hormuz being closed and having it be, 20% of the world's energy route. So President Trump said that, his supporters, he told his supporters that his critics who claim he was not tough enough on Iran, for example, and these are the president's terms, he called them fools, jealous, or stupid, arguing that the military pressure forced Tehran to negotiate, and the White House is portraying the agreement as evidence that there could be a combination of sanctions, military action, and diplomacy that would be produced by these results. That got them to the point that they're at. And now, when it comes to Pentagon, their warning is by U.S. Defense Secretary or U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth. He emphasized that the agreement is conditional because if Iran doesn't go, according to the conditions, then things would escalate. And we've heard the same thing from the Iranian side in when it comes to Lebanon and Israel. The Secretary of War warned that the United States is prepared to restore what he called an ironclad blockade of the Iranian ports if Iran violates its commitments. And this signals that the enforcements remain central to Washington's strategy, and the economic pressure could quickly return if the negotiations break down during these 60 days. So, if you're wondering what is in the 14-point deal, we went through it in detail yesterday, but for good measure, it's important to really go over it to see what's exactly in there. So, immediate measures will be permanent ceasefire framework, end of military operations, reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and maritime security guarantees. When it comes to economic measures, you have a gradual sanctions relief. Iran will have access to its frozen assets, and international reconstruction of fund valued at approximately $300 billion will be provided to the Iranians. Now, this is to be for the investment and development projects for Iran to be able to rebuild. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.